Please remain seated. The show will begin in 3, 2...
Like a Hellcat.
Hi, I'm FandomTraveller87.
Wanna hear a ghost story?
It is now mid-September, roughly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at Betsy Ann's grandmother's house. Betsy Ann and Sam are lounging on the grass, enjoying a nice picnic lunch while listening to Doris Day on the radio, eating bologna sandwiches, mashed potatoes, collard greens, and drinking cans of root beer. Calypso is sleeping on the porch. The backyard itself has its own gazebo, plant nursery, swimming pool, and workshop just 3 feet away from where the kids are sitting. Betsy Ann cradles herself, lowering her head, and she says nothing for a while, until Sam, seemingly concerned, leans forward and then placing his left hand on her right shoulder. Betsy didn't look up at Sam at first. She just shifted uncomfortably, slightly lowering her head, and with a weary sigh, she says in hesitation, "I know that you want to blame yourself, Sam, but putting yourself down isn't going to get us anywhere. We have to work together to put a stop to all of this madness. There's something about both of us, with our abilities, that can make a huge difference for that old place. We just need to gather up all the clues that we need and piece them together, and hopefully we can come up with some sort of conclusion as to who is responsible for this." Now, I normally wouldn't want to talk about this with anyone, but you're my friend and I trust you. I did come across this journal. I don't know whose it is, but the initials are EB. I don't know who EB is, but I think that if maybe we can get a hold of some historical documents over in the town archives, maybe we can come up with some possible names, she suggested. "That is a good idea," said Sam eagerly. "Okay, but take me back to this journal. Did it say anything specifically as to indicate who had a motive to kill Mrs. Kingswood?" inquired Sam. Betsy Ann then replied, "Okay, so the journal entry, the very first one that I came across, was from June 12th, 1947. Somebody had a lot of beef with her, apparently. Her entire family, including her dad. There were allegations of defamation against everyone in the town, and their businesses all went bankrupt," Betsy Ann explained. "And this person blames Mrs. Kingswood for all of that, even going as far as to call her a witch. And I think this person meant it quite literally, like she just placed a curse on everyone that lived here." "Are there any more journal entries after that first one?" asked Sam. Betsy Ann took the journal out of her satchel and flipped a few pages until she got to the next one. This one is marked November 15th of 1950, she said, slowly, as the writing wasn't clearly visible. It looked like it was smudged out due to the wear and tear of the book itself. Now, some pages within the journal were half torn, and others were completely ripped out of the spine and mysteriously discarded. But Betsy Ann read out what she could on this next page. I saw her again last night, Betsy Ann read. I followed her into the woods, and then, just at a safe, cautious distance, I hid behind a bush, and I saw her standing outside of a sawmill, and there's a forest clearing. And then some other person appeared, but whoever this was knew they had to stay hidden. Their voices were muffled, and I couldn't quite make out all that they were saying, but things had gotten loud and very physical. And Felicia Kingswood, after a few minutes of trying to calm the other person down, she ran away. I don't know who this person is, but I have a feeling that this is one of the many cases of a lover's quarrel. I don't quite understand the situation fully, but I think that it is only fair to assume, for argument's sake, that all of Mr. Kingswood's suspicions of his wife's infidelity can be confirmed. All of this is happening somewhere 3 o'clock in the morning. She's absolutely livid when she gets home. I could hear her and Mr. Kingswood shouting. I go to their door to confront them both, but I don't wish to do that out of respect for Mr. Kingswood. After all, he is a friend, and I know that sometimes that he doesn't always need my help, even though a part of me knew that maybe he really did need me. But what could I do? This woman had him wrapped around her finger, and he was like a puppet on a string. Just a dumb, desperate, lonely fool who just couldn't say no to the woman that he loved so deeply, but yet was so blind by his own affections for her that he couldn't really see the kind of person that she really was. Sure, he could get angry at the suspected infidelity. Maybe a part of him really believed that she was being unfaithful, but also part of him just wanted to deny it all because maybe it was just his insecurity that was plaguing him. This woman has to go. She doesn't deserve him. She doesn't deserve any kindness or compassion. She's more trouble than she's worth. Is there anything else after that? Asked Sam. Unfortunately no, replied Betsy, seemingly disappointed. I'm sorry, Sam, but I think that our best bet is to go to the town archives and see what else that we can dig up. Maybe there's others that might be able to shed some light. Maybe we could interview some people who knew Mr. and Mrs. Kingswood. Mrs. Kinley can help us, Betsy Ann shouted, just remembering the local historian and librarian who was funding a special exhibition in town in celebration of the town's founding and talking about the lives of the most important people, the VIPs that made it all possible. Mrs. Kinley owes me a favor anyway, said Betsy. She will definitely come in handy, and I just know that she'll be a valuable asset to provide us with the knowledge that we seek. After all, she's always been very passionate about that particular case involving the disappearance of Mrs. Kingswood. About 4 o'clock that same afternoon, Betsy Ann and Sam had packed their bags and rode their bikes, with Calypso tailing close behind them, as always, rode straight for the town hall. They had then parked their bikes, and with Calypso at the lead, they reached the front door. Betsy Ann then knocked a couple times and waited. Then Mrs. Kinley quickly answered, peeking her head out halfway. Why, hello there, dears. What a pleasant surprise. Sam and Betsy, I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow at 1. I understand that school gets out tomorrow rather early, and you said that you needed help with some extra tutoring? I wasn't expecting you until then, dear. What do I owe the pleasure of this visit? She inquired. Well, said Betsy, we're sorry to disturb you, Mrs. Kinley, but Sam and I were doing a special report for school for history class, and we were wondering if maybe you could assist us? If you don't mind us coming in, of course. Oh, not at all, she replied. Come in, come in. Make yourselves comfortable. I'll get some cookies and lemonade. And don't worry, I'll take that. She gently grabs a hold of the leash, gently pulling Calypso inside and leading her to the kitchen. I will make sure she has some fresh water, and I had just made a really delicious meatloaf. It will be my treat for Cal here, she offered. With that, she and Calypso go into the back area, straight into the kitchen. Sam and Betsy examine the room carefully and cautiously, maybe looking for some clues, or at least just something interesting to do while they're waiting for their lemonade and cookies. Hey, what's that over there? Sam had quickly gotten up and ran over to one newspaper article. It was dated October 31st, 1950, and the headlines read, The body of old man Kingswood found hanging by a telephone cord. Whoa, said Betsy, and she quickly went up behind Sam and also read the article very, very closely. It also says here the way that his body was found was very disturbing. It seems as though as some police speculate, his death was not officially caused by strangulation due to him hanging himself in the attic. Really? Said a voice from behind them. It was Mrs. Kinley. So, this is the special report that you two are doing for school? She asked. She didn't sound upset. She actually sounded intrigued. Well, Mrs. Kinley admits, I was a cop back in those days. I served in the force from 1939 all the way up until the cold case of Mr. Kingswood's alleged suicide occurred. And I had investigated that case for quite a while, even months after it was open and shut immediately, since there wasn't much to go on. And yes, there was a theory that possibly that he was murdered before his body was strung from a telephone cord, she explained. And I was trying to get answers from all of my fellow officers that were also there at the scene at the time of discovery, when one of the neighbors came by that night to drop off a birthday cake for him. Mrs. Kinley was rummaging through some drawers and pulled out some photographs and other documents. And then she had proceeded to grab the silver platter with the cookies and lemonade, setting them on the coffee table in front of the two kids before sitting down. She then proceeded to show them some old photographs of her, Grandma Tallulah, and Mrs. Kingswood standing outside of the old Kingswood house. The first photograph is dated July 4th, 1949. Oh, by the way, how is your grandmother doing, Betsy? Asked Mrs. Kinley. Oh, she's fine, ma'am. Good. Now, I must tell you, dear, I know that you went through a very traumatic experience due to that freak accident that you had. But I need you to know that you can talk to me about anything as long as it makes you comfortable, alright? Now listen. Marigold had phoned me a few nights ago, and she claimed that, due to the contrary, it was no accident. She said that you were attacked by her scarecrow. Is that correct? She actually... Betsy Ann stammered, trailing off her sentence. She's absolutely baffled. She actually said that to you? Now, dear, Mrs. Kinley reassures, I promise that I believe you both. I always thought that there was something mighty wrong with the Kingswood's property as well as Marigold's. That whole area is just cursed. This whole town has been plagued by misfortunes for a very, very long time. I've always been a very big believer in spooks and all that. I can promise you that what happened, that secret is safe with me. No one else has to know. Besides us, Marigold, and of course, your grandma, Tallulah. Now, getting back to the cold case. In the event of the discovery of the body, she continued on, me and a few of my fellow officers were called to the scene about midnight. A neighbor had come by to drop off a birthday cake for Mr. Kingswood, as it was his wife Felicia's birthday, and, well, he didn't really have anyone to celebrate it with, so he invited that neighbor to come over and have a couple slices with him, and they would drink wine. Well, coming midnight, as the neighbor was running awful late, although the neighbor said that it was rather strange for them to come at such a late hour. Well, anyway, it was midnight, and at the stroke of 12, the neighbor knocked on the door. There was no answer, but the door was unlocked, and so the neighbor welcomed themselves in. The neighbor was Tom Foley, who was Mr. Kingswood's gardener and custodian as well as technician. Now, Tom Foley puts the cake down in the kitchen, then calls out to Mr. Kingswood. Still no reply. So, Tom Foley goes up the stairs. The first thing that he says he notices is bloodstains that are up on the steps of the staircase as he's climbing up them. And then he sees that attic door all the way open with the ladder down. So, without any hesitation, Tom Foley climbs up that ladder and goes into the attic. And to his horror, he sees the body of old man Kingswood hanging there from a telephone cord. Me and my peers arrived at the scene, took statements, gathered up some evidence, dusted for fingerprints. We were probably there for a good few hours at least. I asked Tom Foley if he saw anyone leave the house at midnight, and he said no. He couldn't quite remember because he had blacked out sometime after he found the body in the attic. He was on the floor, face down, as though, I don't know, he had either passed out from the shock or somebody attacked him and knocked him out cold. Tom Foley, he's actually working at this one man's meat shop in town. What's his name? Phil? Phil? Repeated Sam. I know him. He and I would go fishing together, sometimes on the weekends, when he would close up his meat shop. You know Phil? Oh, who doesn't know Phil? Said Mrs. Kinley with a groan. Yeah, that man, he certainly is something else. What do you mean by that? Asked Sam. Oh, don't fret about it, dear. Mrs. Kinley replied reluctantly. It's nothing for you to worry about, I promise you. Well, anyway, there's this ongoing theory that Mr. Kingswood didn't die from strangulation due to the impact of the telephone cord choking him. There was a couple more pieces of evidence that suggest that he died before he was hanged. Such as, Betsy Ann pressed on, well, he had a broken left arm, and, well, I don't see how he could have committed the act of suicide with just one arm. After all, not only was that arm broken, but his right one, well, it was more like he was missing like a few of his fingers during such a dreaded pause. Betsy Ann and Sam leaned in closer, sipping from their glasses of lemonade, and just stared at the woman intently. Okay, so what else did you guys find? Well, my other peers, had left a little sooner before I did, and I stuck around a bit longer to survey the scene and see if I could find anything else concrete. The body wasn't yet removed. So, of course, yes, one arm was broken, and on his right arm, a few fingers were missing. But his left leg also had a dislocated knee, and his right foot was severed off. So, why would the others just rule his case out as a suicide? Why would they try to cover it up? Asked Betsy. I don't know, said Mrs. Kinley. What if your superior and your other peers that were there at the scene of the crime on Halloween night when the body was discovered, what if they were all bribed to be silenced and alter the police reports and the autopsy and all that because they were bought by rich, sleazy relatives of the Kingswood family? Betsy Ann and Mrs. Kinley looked at him and looked at each other. They didn't know whether to be absolutely impressed by such a deduction of what seemed to be a really strong theory, or thought it was a bit far-fetched. Well, said Mrs. Kinley slowly, I think that's an interesting theory, son, but we can't be 100% certain. The only person I think that you could ask would be Tom Foley. I actually have his address somewhere in my phone book. Just 1 second. Shortly after, Mrs. Kinley returned with a piece of notebook paper with Tom Foley's name and his current living address. Now be warned, children, that Mr. Foley is a very private, reclusive man who does not like visitors, and he might get a little aggressive with you both. So just keep away from him at a safe distance as much as possible, unless you can get him to talk to you. Just please be careful. I don't want either of you getting hurt. A little time passed, and before they left, Betsy Ann then turned to Mrs. Finley and asked, when you guys dusted for fingerprints of who a possible suspect might be in that cold case, did anything come up? Unfortunately not, young lady, said Mrs. Kinley. You see, back in the early days of homicide investigations, we didn't have the advanced equipment like we do now. So we didn't have a whole lot of resources back then to help us investigate and solve a murder crime. So no, we didn't really have any leads as to who did this. But honestly, if you can think of anything else that you kids want to share with me, and if you ever need any more help on this case, then you come to me. And I promise that no one else has to know, especially not your grandmother, okay? Thank you, ma'am, said Betsy. Okay, Sam, let's go. Let's go meet with Mr. Foley. Are you sure this is a good idea? Said Sam reluctantly, seemingly afraid of encountering Mr. Foley for the first time. What if he has a... Don't worry, we'll be fine. There's nothing to worry about. Like he would shoot at a couple of innocent kids, right? Okay, guys, I'm going to leave this video here. Please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Remember to be your beautiful selves and to always stay spooky. Keep your windows barred shut, curtains drawn, Doors locked up tight, and always look underneath your bed before you go to sleep. I'm FandomTraveller87, and stay tuned for the next part in the story. I love you all and have a happy Halloween. Bye-bye.